Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host and awkward dietitian, Jessica Wilson. At the top of the episode, I want to thank those who rate and review the podcast, especially because I can bring my dad back on the show.
Hi, everybody. Willowbrook Vet says Dr. Doherty's episode was so interesting and informative. Love Dr. Doherty's insights. And on YouTube, Sharon says the same episode was great. She loved the shout out to all creatures, great and small.
Okay, I'm recording this introduction a few hours after my 4:41 a.m. call time for Morning in America, the morning news show for News Nation, an American cable news network. For those watching at home on YouTube or Spotify, you'll be able to see the glow of the morning lighting. Chris Cuomo found a home at News Nation after he was fired from CNN. His show, Cuomo, replaced News Nation Prime. Coincidentally, Cuomo was the reason I'd heard of News Nation in the first place. Folks may remember the strong reactions to anti-dietitians who were making food commercials. Cuomo shared his strong reactions with a guest at the time. A guest I hadn't really heard of before, but who introduced himself to me since.
Chief Medical Officer, Function Health. Love him. It's good to see you, Doc. So look, I mean, you and I know each other, and we are both of the same school that you got to do it every day, and you got to do it right, and you can't out-train the kitchen. But now it's like everybody's just gone full fake news. Eat whatever you want. It's all a lie. You'll be fine. What is going on, and what is going wrong?
Well, Chris, we are in a national emergency around our health in this country. 75% of us are overweight, 42% are obese. We're in a metabolic health crisis. It's caused by the food we're eating. And there's an enormous effort by the food industry to confuse and confound the public. And they've created this movement, this anti-diet movement, where they're paying influencers who are not transparent to promote eating all kinds of junk online, saying it's fine to do without any inhibition. And they're saying we shouldn't shame anybody. There's no bad foods. It's bad to tell people to not eat junk because it shames them. Well, shame on the food companies for what they're doing.
Other notable names for the network include political contributors Sean Spicer and Mick Mulvaney. Morning in America asked me to talk about ultra-processed foods after reading an op-ed that I authored for Slate about what I dubbed Ultra-Processed Food Awareness Week. Along with the discussions about dry January, ultra-processed foods were in the 2025 New Year's resolution spotlight. The first work week of January, the New York Times dedicated itself to talking about ultra-processed foods each day and gave us another quiz about them. The Washington Post was telling us how to buy the best nuggets of the ultra-processed ones, and The New Yorker was vying for our attention with the title, "Why is the American Diet So Deadly?" Slate reached out to me that Tuesday to ask me to write an op-ed about what I thought about all of it. The editor and I talked the following day and decided that the piece would be anchored by Trader Joe's and how so much of the conversation and rage about ultra-processed foods is centered on the idea that they're only chips, soda, frozen nuggets, and fast food. The op-ed brought up the conversations I had with Amy and our general confusion about what makes an ultra-processed food, and I talked about how dramatic and intentionally sensational Dr. Chris Van Tulleken's media coverage was. To be honest, I was surprised they kept my mention of Van Tulleken in there. For me to be able to openly critique him was a sign of change in the conversation for me. All of this got me remembering my interview with Lindsay Wallace about 16 months ago. I'd asked her how something becomes news after that wall-to-wall coverage of Van Tulleken's experiment. I also remembered that she was the first one to mention trad wives on this podcast. I looked at Chris Van Tulleken's comments about how his book got nominated for an award, and somebody said exactly that they stopped eating store-bought bread and are now making bread. And I'm like, this is who the book is for. Like, who are these people? I don't know. Lindsay, do you know who these people are?
I feel like I have a passing familiarity with these people. I see them on Instagram and they are recommended to me. Instagram thinks that I am a trad wife who is raising my 8 children in the image of the Lord.
I decided to ask Lindsay back to the show to talk about the evolution of ultra-processed food coverage, changes in the media, and if anything had changed in expectations of gender. Lindsay and I also talked about another surprising email of support I received. As you all know, I am definitely one to name names, but after recording this, I decided to bleep one out in case my future holds millions of dollars. Lindsay is a freelance health and culture writer and senior staff writer at Quarter Horse PR. Her latest article was for the BBC titled, "This App Became My Friend. Mourning is Human. New grief apps want to optimize it for you." It will be linked in the show notes. Lindsay, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's so fun to be back.
Yeah. I brought you on basically to talk about what I am going to talk to you about today, which is wild.
Yeah, it's an ever evolving monster with many heads. So I guess it will never stop being relevant, which is great because I guess it means I get to keep coming back.
Right. Yeah, I feel like this will not be the end. So it'll be good. So I sent you a bunch of articles, and what do you think has happened to the coverage of ultra-processed foods over time?
It definitely, like you pointed out, has gotten more, I don't know if nuanced is the right word, but it has begun to challenge the original narrative of like ultra-processed foods are this terrible thing that is so bad for us. And to instead say like, this category of ultra-processed foods, is it valuable? What does it encompass? We can't tell. How do we apply it? We don't know. Which is, it's interesting to watch, especially because the narrative that they're like busting, they created in the first place.
Right.
So it's very like, there's like a journalistic newness bias, and like it's never like, you know, dog bites man, it's always man bites dog. So it's like, okay, well, we told everybody that ultra processed foods were the devil, and we did everything we could with that. So actually now what if they're not that bad? And I'm glad that they're doing it because it's important and it's accurate, and people like you have been saying that the entire time. Right. But it's like when you think about why it happened, it doesn't seem like they have like the best intentions necessarily.
That's interesting. Yeah, redoing their own coverage of the same thing a year and a half later. I truly thought that if nobody picked up my critiques a year and a half ago, that it would die. Like it would just go away. There would be nothing to say about it anymore. Fascinatingly enough, that did not happen. So with the Time magazine, folks have heard, you know, what happened with that. After the Slate op-ed that I will link to, everything was positive. Every email was positive.
That is, I mean, that's amazing. Especially like the people who email about articles. Like, I feel like that's a group that trends towards people who are not in a good mood generally. So that's really amazing.
The people who bothered to reach out, right? So it was wild to me that people decided to reach out after Time just to tell me how awful and gross I was, right? But yeah, people went out of their way to say, yeah, for sure, you're right. I totally agree. And I was like, all right, this is only 4 months later or 5 months later.
Yeah.
And totally different. I don't know.
I mean, I'm glad, like, first of all, just for your sake, because like to be inundated with that is horrible.
Fair. And then, I mean, nobody reached out after the Daily Mail. So, you know.
I'm so surprised to hear that.
Yes. Daily Mail got me. I was so ready for them to like do me really dirty on that one. I was waiting for Chris Van Teleken knows what he's doing. This dietitian is trying to undo his legacy or like something, anything. Like
she punched his baby in the face, like anything, the Daily Mail.
Yeah. Yet she's doesn't know what she's talking about, like something. And that did not happen. I was ready. Yeah. I was like, any press about this is going to be like good because we'll be able to continue the conversation. And they were the first ones to put the last 2 paragraphs in about like actual like societal and systemic concerns that this is, you know, just one facet of, which surprised me. I was like, okay, Daily Mail.
Yeah, it feels like, I mean, at the point where the Daily Mail can't ignore the actual like substance of the conversation anymore, it's like breached containment. Like you have been saying from the beginning, I can do the same thing in a way that an actual person would do it and demonstrate to you that this is not this like horrible, scary thing. And it became clear enough that even the Daily Mail could not ignore it.
That's a good point. They did ask me if I had a before and after photo.
Wow. And then that was why they had to scrub through your TikToks to be like,
to try and put one together. I love that I'm wearing the purple Fanta shirt and they have that in the caption. It's like wearing a soda shirt or something like that.
They're like, love soda, bathes in soda, wears soda clothes.
Mm-hmm. She just, yes, can't get away from it. She needs to advertise it to people to drink, but I mean, okay, my dog was in that one. I was like, yay, she gets her moment as well.
She looked adorable. It's a great picture. You looked very happy. Like,
yeah, so random. I didn't even remember why I had that on the internet. Even I got to give a shout out to my friend at the Washington Post, Anon O'Connor, who has come up on this podcast surprisingly more than once. Call back to Shauna Spence and her experience with the Lose It app, the anti-diet dietitians. He was a part of all of that. He was the one that wrote how to choose healthier ultra-processed foods for the Washington Post. And one of them was chicken nuggets, how to choose a healthier chicken nugget. And I'm like, how far have you fallen from the pedestal that it seems like you felt like you were on, that you're now doing this?
Yeah, you're now willing to suggest that any chicken nugget could be eaten by anyone safely ever.
Right. And, his, collaboration with the examination was ultra processed foods, food, big food, all of these things. And now here he is. Just, I guess I hadn't even thought about it. Maybe I should reach out to Sasha at the examination and just see what he has to say about it. Who knows?
It's really interesting too, because I feel like people don't realize when their perspectives have shifted, because it's really hard to confront the idea that you've done a really meaningful 180 on a topic. Not that that's a 180 necessarily, but it's a really meaningful shift. And I feel like if you were to be like, hey, it seems like your perspective has changed on this, and I've been doing work on this, and I'd love to hear it would just be like, no, I've always been saying this. Which maybe not. Maybe I'm not giving them all enough credit, but yeah.
Well, yeah. If you're out there, Sasha or anybody who knows, folks at the examination, I would love to hear from you again. I'm also really glad that a lot of the big food noise has died down some in all of this. We're not blaming big food as and by we, these articles are not as much. The wellness influencers for sure still are. But
it also feels like when you look at the most prominent voices right now, they're anti-big food. It's going to be like RFK Jr. and you're suddenly, aligning yourself with the guy who's like, yeah, I left the bear in Central Park and that was a normal thing to do. And you're like, wait a second, who am I if I feel the same way that this guy does? I need to talk about this issue differently.
Interesting. That makes me think of the raw milk of it all. And I will forever say that this podcast first heard the term trad wives from you. Yes, your algorithm was assuming that you were a trad wife.
It wanted me to start making my own bread and doing the raw milk thing, which I can't fit a cow in my apartment, but the aspirations that Instagram had for me were crazy.
Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect tie-in to, I think, where we are now. You were great at, bringing up gender and gender roles and gender, who's going to be the one baking this bread. And so do you see a through line from the bake your own bread of it all to, trad wives to where we are now?
Yeah, it feels, there's an article in The Cut that I thought was really interesting about how in the lead up to the most recent election or immediately after, a lot of influencers who previously were deliberately obfuscating their political leanings, quote unquote, came out as Donald Trump supporters and were like, I won't lie about what I believe and who I am anymore, which is so brave. And they're people who, for a long time, the most appealing, palatable face of ideas about, you should make your own bread and you should stay home and you should grow all your own vegetables and ideas that are not realistic for most people about what your diet should look like and what kind of labor should go into your diet. And a lot of them are people who were you could infer from the way they were living their lives and like the like morning Bible study and the like deference to my husband that they were probably pretty conservative. But then there was this moment where they were all like, I am conservative. I did vote for Trump. I'm super into it. I think it's great. And the like trad wife ideology that has like previously sort of been presented as like, I'm separate from worldly matters. It's actually not my problem. Now they seem like more prepared to say, I am fully in on this. And that is like part of actually why I think these things that I do about like food and diet and how it ties into my family.
Initially, and especially now, another thing that you got me thinking about was how when ultra processed people came out, Dr. Chris Van Tulligen was like the guy going out. We were hearing all about his job and his work, and how hard it was for him to be doing this experiment and be, separate from the family. And I guarantee you now that I'm thinking about it, he was never the one that was going to be the one to bake the bread. So I am wondering and thinking about how just that narrative contributed to any of the things that people should be doing or any of the ways that women should be acting because we care about our kids.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not like, oh, well, you should be doing this because you're a woman. It's like, you should be doing this because do you want your children to suffer? And then like, well, naturally, how does this labor seem to fall? Oh, it's on you. Well, okay, fine. But do you have a problem with that? Do you want your children to suffer? And like, even, I don't have like a lot of friends who have children like at the point in my life that I'm at, but like people that I know who are generally like progressive are still like very concerned about, if they read something that's like red dye will make my child have a harder time at school. And it's like, they're like, I'm pretty sure this is bullshit, but if it's not, then like I made my child have a harder time at school by letting him have Gatorade. And like, that must be terrifying.
And then the inspirational folks that we can look to who are really, doing it all, making their own chocolate from cacao nibs and all of these things and growing the cocoa plants and stuff.
And telling their wives to make granola.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Gender. I mean, of course, we can't escape it, but I'm wondering, yes, if there is, what's the intersection there? So thank you for always having me think about that.
Thank you for having me think about it. I'm always like, these conversations are so fun.
I'm glad you think so. Something that I personally take issue with is the idea that all of these women and these lifestyles are crunchy or the new crunchy. And I would like to go on the record and say, no, I think that they are crusty, not crunchy. I am a former crunchy lesbian. I was in the Pacific Northwest. It's where I started wearing chacos and I never stopped. It is where people live in co-ops. They still have co-ops. I worked at a food co-op. The way that we would get our food, because we did not have much money, was people would put things in bulk packages. They put them from the section into their bags. They would leave them there. We would go get them. Because we needed and wanted food. That is a crunchy lifestyle, like eating things that people have left behind and probably touched. I had a 400 square foot garden and, like those type of things. People's feet were dirty. The BO smell. I'm sure no trad wife has a husband with body odor. I am positive that is a thing. So I'm just going to say I'm not comfortable with calling these folks crunchy, but because there are people doing so, what do you see or think about where that, wellness or movement is going?
It feels like the pre-trad wife is like a crusty green juice girly that is like involved in all of that, the whole idea of like clean talk and like, she's a clean girl. She eats clean. Yeah. She's always clean. She definitely doesn't smell weird. She buys things you know, like at a scale that you can't possibly fathom in order to facilitate the idea that she's extremely clean. So probably there are a lot of like plastic packaging bits and boxes in her apartment, but she won't pan to the floor. So you don't know about that. It's all very clean. And like, it feels like, you know, she, like that whole idea is very like, you are inside and out, totally aligned and optimized and like at one with nature, without acknowledging the fact that probably your lifestyle is actually not very good for nature in terms of like the amount of stuff that you have to buy and the way that you have to live to create the outward appearance of being like a quote unquote clean girl. Not to mention like the conversations about how that aesthetic is something that, you know, when Black and brown women do it is like, that's trashy. And when white women do it is like, she looks so clean and she looks so virtuous, she looks so pure, whatever other things that are like, or do you just think that when you see a white woman and then she also happens to have a slick back bun? Like, but I think that like the idea of, you know, I'm going to get up early, I'm going to do my yoga, I'm going to drink my green juice. Like, it's not like any of those individual habits are bad. It's just that the idea of putting them all together feels like you're on a pipeline of like, I figured out how to optimize my body. I'm going to eat right. I'm going to only eat clean because I'm clean. And that will lead me to a point where I have become virtuous enough to deserve this husband and these children and this lifestyle. And in the meantime, I'm going to tell you all about how you can get those things too, which is to buy what I bought on Amazon, don't show anyone the box, and drink this juice.
Yes. Click these links. These hyperlinks for which I will get no money from at all. Yes.
No,
They're just,
none.
I'm just offering them. I get no kickbacks from these.
Because a girl's girl doesn't gatekeep, and that's really important, actually.
Ugh. Wow. What a journey. Yeah. What a journey. Oh, and speaking of this clean business and green juice situation, leading up to like right up to the conversation about ultra processed foods, like all we would hear was plant-based meat, plant-based everything, plant-based. It died down some, I want to say, in the last little bit. I'm not sure what in the zeitgeist has happened. Maybe we just can't demonize ultra processed foods as much as we used to. So now we're going to start talking about plant-based foods again. And I heard today, like the making of the perfect melty vegan cheese, like a whole segment on it. And it was like, how are we doing these things at the same time? I don't know.
It's like, I mean, I guess it's just like, well, that couldn't be an ultra processed food because, you know, vegan cheese is so virtuous and so good and vegans eat it, for God's sake. Like,
it's true. The people with green juices are also, yes, they can't be, you know, they're clean. They can't be dirty. They can't be having ultra processed. Yeah. It's super interesting to me out there. The cognitive dissonance, the like, vacuum, the tunnel. I will say though, I would vote a crunchy person being the one to eat or drink raw milk or raw cheese. I would put those together. The rest, nah. We're not doing
that. I feel like that makes sense. And I appreciate having that reality check because it's also like, I've heard this thing talked about that's like all aesthetics are so accessible now that you can dress in a way that makes you appear like you might be, you know, a certain type of person and then you're actually not, which like the thing that, you know, I talk about there the most is like queer aesthetics and being like, that woman has a carabiner on her belt loop, so she's a lesbian. And then she's like, ew, are you hitting on me? And it's like, oh no, because you can't tell anymore. So it's nice to know, you know, that a crunchy person would drink the raw milk, but not necessarily go so far as to do the other things.
Right. They would do it in their co-op. The lid would be off in the fridge that has never been cleaned. People don't wash their legs or their feet. Like, this is the conditions under which raw milk would be had. They're also making their own tofu. I have been to make your own soy milk things at co-ops when I was living this crunchy lifestyle, but it was filthy. They didn't have hair dryers because you can't have, you know, that energy. You know? So you can't get these blowouts on the internet to show, you know, the girlies. Yeah. All right. It's a tangent. We'll see how much, you know, I decide to keep in at the end and how much.
I mean, I'm glad to know that.
We are learning things. Man. So in Ultra Processed Food Awareness Week, Slate reached out. And then after seeing Slate is when the Daily Mail reached out. And I think after or in the midst of all of that, News Nation reached out. And since this episode is going to run next week, potentially 2 days after, I will have been on News Nation at 4 a.m. here because they're on East Coast time.
Oh my God.
But them, like a 5,000 Instagram follower news program, also being interested in this story, interesting as far as like where is news going. I definitely said yes to this because Chris Cuomo moved from CNN to News Nation and has his own show there. And Chris Cuomo was one of the people who talked shit about anti-diet dietitians. And he had Mark Hyman on his show. And they were like, we know how this works. Basically, you can work out all that you want, but you have to like put in the work in the kitchen as well. What, as you know, a journalist and somebody who I feel is very critical of all things, where do you think things are going? What is happening in news media?
I would like somebody who is very critical of all things to be my new LinkedIn like description of myself as a professional, whatever yes. I am, a professional whatever. Yeah,
professional
I think
critical thinker is that's good.
I think it was interesting because it's like with the size of the following they have and with the fact that that's where Chris Cuomo is now, it reminds me of a move that the Washington Post recently made, which has been like widely criticized. And also the Washington Post has been like flailing for a while now with a series of bonkers decisions, but they laid off like the majority of or all of their PR department. And that's the department that like previously would have been in charge of publicizing their stories and their journalism. And they are instead going to pivot to a model that's focused on talent-driven journalism. And the idea of that is that they're going to be like influencer marketing, but for journalism. Like they want to pour their resources into this personality is bringing you the stories that you want and you like the personality. So you're interested in the stories rather than the stories are interesting or necessary or whatever. And it feels like something that's very precipitated by the rise of like news influencers and people who like are not even necessarily like, I don't think it's accurate to say that like none of them are journalists because like, what is a journalist? I could call myself a journalist and I do, and who knows whether that's allowed. But like, I think that News Nation being this like comparatively extremely small outlet, but with Chris Cuomo there, who is a like, that's a talent driven journalism move. And then to say like, okay, so Jessica Wilson has exponentially more Instagram followers than we do and has a platform that has been engaged with by much more legitimate news outlets than our outlet. We are going to cover this story because we've seen it be covered in all of these other places and it's going to help us legitimize our platform. And I want to also believe that there's somebody working there who is like, this is important to talk about. And I'm willing to believe that because there aren't a lot of jobs in journalism and I'm sure some nice person works at News Nation, but like, yeah.
Interesting. And as of recording today, CNN announced that it was laying off like 200 employees as part of a shift to a digital model. And it says it plans to create a new digital streaming product, says the chief executive.
But CNN had an unsuccessful digital streaming product.
Right. Because I mean, as a NPR person, as people know I am, Audie Cornish went from NPR to do like her own online format, but then got pushed into podcasting because it flopped. So what does that mean?
That's so, and also like, I feel like everyone right now is down on streamers because everyone has realized that it's the same as paying for cable channels. And so it seems like a weird time to try again to have a streaming service when it's an even worse landscape for that. But it's so good that they laid off a bunch of people in order to facilitate their bad decision. I'm so happy that they freed up all those funds.
What is happening? I will see people on TikTok or who knows what will happen by TikTok by the time this comes out.
By or next Instagram week, or wherever.
Yeah, or wherever it is. And let me tell you, I've been the person to like go through an article that somebody has spent, time on and like sharing it with their followers or just comes up with their own news. And let me put myself in one of those kind of categories. Because I mean, I had, somebody come on and talking about bird flu. I felt that was very newsy,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is happening when there are people getting information from not news? What is happening with news? What's going on?
What's going on?
Yeah.
I feel, and like, this is related, but it's the Trump administration also ordered all of the federal health agencies to stop releasing information publicly. So, this was the first day, as of recording, this was the first day in decades that the CDC didn't put out its like morbidity and mortality report that doctors and nurses and hospitals rely on. And like, who knows what the fallout of that is going to continue to be for however long this goes on. But like, I don't think that it was ever possible to say, oh, well, when the government puts out its health related press releases, we can trust them. Or, oh, when CNN puts out its health related coverage, we can trust it. But one of the benefits of having multiple sources of information and hopefully multiple people with like the right education thinking critically about that information was that eventually someone was going to tell you the truth about it. And now it's like, there are no releases from government agencies. There are no people at these publications whose job it is to tell you about this. Your access to this information is like constricting. And so then there are like people who are saying, okay, well, I'm trying to read the studies and I'm trying to look at the available information and communicate it to people because I think it's important. And I am somebody who like, I could call myself a journalist and I don't feel like it's totally fair of me to do that because I don't have like credentials in journalism and there are like things I don't know or haven't done that make me feel hesitant to do it. And then I look at like people who call themselves journalists and they're on the internet being like,
yes,
use bone broth for sunscreen. And I'm like, never mind, I'm fine. And it's like
something that I don't think I've mentioned on the podcast, at least not yet, is that University of California, Davis is one site that was testing milk supply for bird flu and then reporting it to CDC, reporting it to national organizations. And they were the ones that were keeping track. Granted, state governments were doing the same thing, but so we're just going state by state. Are they going to be communicating with other states? Like, how are we going to know what is happening if, yes, our government agencies are not able to communicate with us? But Lindsay, we couldn't trust them anyhow because what is science? So
exactly. And I hate that because I'm like, oh, I don't trust them. And that's right, not to trust them. They have legacies of doing horrible things. They're doing horrible things right now. And then I look at like raw milk people and they're like, I don't trust them. And I'm like, no, but yes, but no.
Yeah. I found myself in that place too. I'm like, oh, might it be good if we didn't rely so heavily on federally funded research? And that would be nice. Less on industry funded research. I don't know where this money is going to come from because that's not my job to figure out. But how are we going to know things? How will things get done? And then I start feeling like a conspiracy theorist 1000% when I'm like, maybe I don't trust, organizations as much as I should. My guess is that we're going to wait until HHS is confirmed. I'm not going to name names because we just never know. And then they will be responsible for reviewing everything before it goes out. And that's terrifying.
And then it will be very definitively that, that information is meaningless and can't be trusted, which, at least we'll be sure then.
We'll be positive we shouldn't believe it.
And that'll be such a relief.
I mean, kind of, you're right. Oh, but then we're going to go to our favorite influencer. Well, no. Those folks will believe that person. The raw milk influencers will believe that person. So the rest of us are going to be on our own, wondering what the truth is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe the channels by which information is leaked from within the federal government will become, maybe there will be a lot more traffic there. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. ProPublica is going to become the New York Times.
To me, ProPublica is already the New York Times. ProPublica has been the New York Times. Mm-hmm. I admire their reporting on healthcare so much.
Something I had been curious about in all of the previous reporting on ultra processed foods and my input in them and podcast episodes about them was that, I kept saying, because I have to be accused of working for big food, that I need to be paid millions by them, right? In order, because I have to put up with this. Somebody reached out after the Slate article from Big Food, from the found my article on Slate on ultra processed foods, and it sparked her interest.
Ooh.
Sparked. And then I got how the was founded, and part of their work is focusing on education, et cetera, et cetera. And of course I replied with, tell me more. Will you come on my podcast? So fingers are crossed for that. Also, my follow-up question will be, will you pay me $1 million? Because absolutely I will flip.
Yeah, and in a moment.
Yeah, that Fanta shirt that the Daily Mail said that I was wearing will be actually an advertisement. Because yes, I will $1 million a year. I would do a lot of things for $1 million a year. So,
I think they should understand it would be worth their while. If you're listening, anyone from the it would be well worth your while.
So we'll keep our fingers crossed for either way. On the podcast would be great. Morals, ethics, whatever. Truth, science, whatever.
Millions of dollars.
Yes. What are we going to do here? We're going to take the millions for sure.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's why I'm a freelance journalist, for the millions of dollars.
Oh, but doesn't that go back to our tech, our oligarchy, our news media, our influencers? Ugh. And where are we getting our news from? And damn it. And Make America Healthy Again and RFK Jr. Shit. If you get paid enough, you will say whatever gets you paid more money.
It is wild because there are obviously a lot of people who could really use that money, but the people who are getting paid so much that they start saying things are not, they don't need it. They already had, that's how the money they had that means they don't need it is because they were already doing that. How long can you be for sale like that?
Yeah. But yeah, they met the people who will give them more money by having money.
That's true. That's true. I forget that they just have rooms where everyone is has their net worth written on their little name tag or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I also feel there's a Discord channel that you get invited to.
That's probably true. Although most of them probably have their executive assistant transcribing for them because they don't know how to use the internet like that because they're too old.
Very fair. Lindsay, thank you. Thank you for coming back. I really hope to keep this conversation going.
I will eagerly await being invited back, and if I'm not, I will assume it's because gave you millions and millions of dollars.
Okay, thank you so much for coming back. I will hopefully talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Good luck to all of us in this world.
Yay, 2025. All right, friends, next week we'll be back to policy. By the time this episode is out, RFK Jr. will have had his Senate hearing, and I will have gotten my first C-SPAN login to watch it. I'll have a couple guests back to talk about it and anything that's happened since. I also got some good YouTube comments about last week's episode featuring Mark as my first grifter, and I look forward to sharing them all with you next time. Until then, friends, make it awkward. You can support the show by joining the Patreon linked in the show notes. You can follow the show. You can subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Leaving a comment there or a review on Apple Podcasts will bring my dad back to the show to read them. You can buy merch like my dad's sweatshirt on my website. This has been Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson. The show is edited by the newsworthy Jen Jacobs and supported by Patreon members and the legacy of Sacramento Outboard Services.